Alrighty, we'll start kicking this discussion off. Yeah, Tony, if you want to switch on your video and join us. Hey, Tony, how you going?
Hey, Scott. Good, thanks.
All right, so today is the first in our CTO chat series where we're going to be chatting to CTOs from across the Australian tech community. Tony's volunteered to be the first, which could be a good thing or a bad thing for Tony. We're about to find out. So we're going to experiment a bit with this format, but the idea is, look, we want to hear from all the great CTOs and technical folks that we've got that are building like really interesting technology companies and all the ins and outs that go with that, like how do you get teams to work together? How do you think about technology? How do you enable growth? We're going to try and cover the gamut of topics that we can cover. What we're going to focus on today is we're going to center it a bit around a topic which is the first 90 days in private equity. But we could go anywhere. The idea is to be a bit informal. So like I said, please jump in and kind of become a part of the discussion. It's as much about Tony and I having a chat as you getting involved in the chat as well. What I'll do, I'm going to do some quick intros, and then we're going to jump straight into it. I'm going to start peppering Tony with questions, but we're just going to kind of go through it however it evolves. So to get started, so just a little bit about Terram. So we're a tech product development and strategy firm. We work with enterprise, tech companies, and government. And look, we love building product. We love working on the strategy, and we love working with organizations to help make those internal capabilities better. That's us in a nutshell. I'm the CEO and founder. I've probably been involved in 61, 70 or so major product launches now. I love making sausages, and I love sailing. It's one of my other passions. Now, Tony, I've had the good fortune of knowing for a while. So Tony, there's a bit on the screen there, but I think one of the things that I definitely know and love about Tony is deeply considers what's going on, has a mind for the business, which we'll probably chat about it in a bit, a mind for the business, as well as like that deep ability to get deep technically. So I'm really looking forward to chatting about today with Tony today. I think so Tony's the CTO of Linkly. Tony, you've been here about almost 6 months now?
9 now. March I started.
Almost 9 months. Prior to that, Tony was at MYOB.
7
What's
months.
that? Almost 9.
Does it? 7 months. 9 months.
Seems like 9. the prior to that, Tony was at MYOB, where I think it was about a couple hundred people, the organization you led there at MYOB, the accounting practice.
Team, as I left, the team was probably around 140 or so as I left there.
Yep. And you started your career as a database administrator. Is that?
Yeah, I did.
What database technology?
That was back on, it was a mix of, it was predominantly SQL Server on OS2 systems. So I was PDA working on some of the branch systems. Yeah.
Okay. And what's your favorite memory from back then?
God,
we've never spoken about this before.
No, we haven't. You know, I actually don't have a lot of good memories from that time. That's the reason why I kind of got out of it pretty quick. I just remember as a junior, I was doing a lot of overtime, 70, 80 plus hour weeks, trying to do branch updates overnight. So it wasn't all that good an experience, but it did kind of, you know, one of the things there is the one thing I did there that actually got me my next gig, where I spent 20 years at the Integrated Research, was I actually managed to reverse engineer the NT performance registry data stuff to be able to pull out more detailed performance metrics than was provided by the task manager.
Yeah, so right.
It gave us a much deeper distribution or understanding of all our branch performance across the whole network across Australia. And it was that and the ability to do that actually got my next gig in Integrated Research. It was all about performance monitoring.
Yeah, okay. You didn't end up in cybersecurity?
No, it didn't end up in cybersecurity.
Reverse engineering NT? It sounds like fun.
Yeah. Well, it was fun. It wasn't easy, but it was the fun part of the job. Yeah.
Yeah. And So fast forwarding to your more recent couple of months. So I think interestingly at MYOB, MYOB recently was a public company and then was acquired by KKR, the private equity giant. And now at Linkly, for those that kind of don't know, so Linkly is a payment processing technology company. Have I got that kind of spot on?
Close enough at a high level. Yep.
And I think Linkly's in at you do the payment processing at Harris Farm. Is that, just to give people, is it Harris Farm or?
Harris Farm, I'm not sure about. So some of our key partners, we provide the main merchant suite or B-Point solution for CBA. So if businesses are using the CBA on an online side of things, they'll be using us. If you've ever gone into a Woolworths store, we provide a lot of the infrastructure or the enablement there for your everyday pay and your payments and the like. Bunnings is another big one, JB Hi-Fi. So some pretty big names.
Okay.
Quite large penetration in the market.
Yep. And before I knew about payments, I didn't realize how deep payments goes with so many layers in order to facilitate what seems really simple. I tap my card and money goes to the merchant. That's actually quite a complex industry. And then so MYOB was accounting software, the private equity firm, and Linkly, jumping to Linkly. Linkly was purchased, or a group of companies were bought and merged together under a private equity firm. And so the topic for us today is really understanding, from hearing from you, Tony, having seen different sides of different technology companies, what is it about a private equity journey as a CTO that might be a bit different? And then we'll kind of go a bit broader. But I'd love to first hear about what's the first 90 days look like in a private equity backed technology company?
It's a good question. And I think one of the things I struggle with the question a little bit is I don't know what it's like as a CTO in any other type of company yet. So Linkly is my first CTO gig. I think what I grew into at MYOB was definitely a CTO level role, given that 140 people in the looking at. I think all the heads of delivery at MYOB are kind of division CTOs. But being the CTO, what I've learned is it's still different yet again. So being a CTO of a public company, I couldn't really talk to. I think there's inferences that you can make through my time at MYOB as to what was driving us as a publicly listed company, and then what might have been driving us as private equity. For Linkly, the core thing that I focused on initially was listening to everybody that I could. So for probably the first month, I was just in, for the most part, back-to-back meetings with anybody whose name came up in a conversation. It didn't matter really who they were. I made sure I spoke to everybody that was in my team. I also talked to people in other teams across DevOps, Ops, support, marketing, sales, product. So it was really just a matter of, trying to understand who's who in the zoo. But also given the history, and you touched on a little bit, the history of Linkly being actually, one company that acquired two others. So essentially three companies that were trying to bridge the cultural and product sets across. The dynamics there were challenging. There was, I spoke to quite a lot of people, and I probably came out of my discussions there with 40 to 50 number one priorities that had to be dealt with. Some of those were cultural in that, we're still talking, there was still us and them language across the different companies. So there wasn't a we are Linkly one team kind of concept or roadmap or product set. It was all quite disjointed. And working through, any sort of acquisition of that sort of nature, almost any acquisition, I guess, there's things that happen that people aren't necessarily happy with. And we were dealing with a situation where, as part of the acquisition or soon after it, there were CEO changes, there was attrition, there were redundancies that occurred as a result of that. So I came in March. Malta, the CEO, came in February, and we were both kind of dealing with the repercussions of stuff that, we weren't here. It wasn't under our control, but kind of got to learn what's going on, what the landscape is, and what are the right things to focus on next. And that was probably a big part of the first 90 days, really, is listening to that conversation and working out, okay, what's most burning right now, and what do we put attention to?
And just one thing we didn't cover, just people-wise, how big's Linkly people-wise, just to give a bit of sense for the audience of like the scale of how many people you had to have coffee with by the sounds of it in a month?
So right now, Linkly has grown over the last several months since we started. So we're currently around 110 or so people.
Mm-hmm.
In the technology division that I'm looking after, there's 36 in that group. When I started in March, we were around 20 people in the development team, and probably, I want to say 60 or 70 company-wide. Probably closer to the 60 now that I think back on it. So quite a lot of growth.
Yeah, that's almost a doubling of headcount, which is
hard
no matter what size you are.
Absolutely. But to the question there, I think, over that first month, I probably spoke to probably 50 or so of the 60-ish that were there, and I might have the total number there wrong. I'm just trying to think back, but there was a good number of conversations.
Yeah, and so you went through, you spoke to everyone. Is it hard as someone who's been quite solution driven, reverse engineering NT performance issues and that kind of stuff, how did you find just sitting back and not jumping in and being like, I've got the solution to that? Did you really purposefully just put on your listening hat and park your opinion?
It has to be purposeful. It definitely has to be purposeful. I kind of had the benefit, if you like, of the MYOB experience there too. So with both the changes, coming from integrated research, I was there for 20 years. I started as a trainee software engineer. I went through, the various software engineering ranks up to architect, to dev manager, and then ultimately GM of the R&D group of around 70 or so people. So it was an area where I was able to learn my leadership skills, but also I still knew the stack. I still technically knew pretty much everything.
Because you'd see, I
built it up. I was part of the journey. Even if it wasn't something I built, I knew who to talk to, and I knew, tangentially what was going on there.
Yeah.
As I went into MYOB, it was, I had to just focus on the leadership element. I had no technical background of what the team were dealing with. I kind of had to learn that as I went. And that's true any role you go into, right? You don't understand or you don't know the technical solution that's there. You've got to learn it. But also having to learn the domain. So that experience at MYOB, I think, was a good one for me to really realize, okay, there are people around me that understand the technical aspects. And yes, I've got to challenge that. I've got to provide guidance and guardrails around that. And on occasion, dive in and help out with the design and potentially implementation or solutioneering of what's going on. But for the most part, my core role is providing them an environment to get that done.
Yeah.
So at MYOB, it was a similar sort of journey where I joined there. There was probably about 30 people in the team. I started there as a dev manager, looking after probably a half a dozen of those, but working across the full 30 or so. And we grew that. I think Terem was part of that growth journey for us as we partnered with you guys on a number of key projects as we grew out to 140. And, you're talking about that number of people, you can't maintain technical depth.
Yeah.
It's impossible. You've got to rely on the people that you've got on your team to be able to do that. So in some respects, that MYOB experience set me up for being able to do that a bit more effectively. So as I started at Linkly, it was a similar sort of journey or problem. I had no idea of the technical stack. I'd never worked in the payments domain before. The reason I was brought on was for that leadership and the growth and scale experience and agile methodologies and uplifting some of those modernization of practices, less so my technical experience. The idea was we'd hire to fill that technical experience gap, and we have.
Yeah.
So in that sense, having learnt that at MYOB, it was a little bit easier for me, I think, to step back and kind of go, okay, where are the key technical problems I've got to solve, and where are the more systemic, people, organizational or business problems that need to be addressed?
Yeah. And Chris, I think we had Chris in the audience wanted to say something. Chris, do you want to just stick your hand up or write a comment, I can try the allow to talk to let you jump in. All good, sorted. Okay. Maybe it was all good. Yeah, so that's interesting that you know, stepping out of the technical, have you changed your approach the second time around doing this? Are you keeping more out of the technical this time, or do you still feel you need to have a grasp of that? Like,
yeah, look, it's one of those almost, it's a bit of a buzzword perhaps, but it's almost an existential crisis kind of thing for anybody, I think, that steps into senior level roles who really come from technical backgrounds. Do I wish I could be closer to the technical knowledge and detail? Definitely. Is that where my skills are best applied? Probably not. And that's what kind of guides me a little bit. I need to have, any CTO does, but I think, you know, there's one of the things I learned as I took on the CTO role and tried to work out, what does this mean for me? What does it mean for Linkley? Is, you know, there's CTOs that are on one level, you know, the principal developer for a shop, particularly in a startup mode. And there are CTOs that, you know, you've got architects and engineering managers and principal devs around you that are fulfilling that, and you've got to provide a bit of more high level guidance. So I'm probably, you know, somewhere 50% above that spectrum, if I really kind of call that out.
Yep.
And you know, in order to be able to do that, I've had to have a close look at, all right, where do I need to get into the detail and where not? And what's guided me so far at Linkley is where our burning problems are. And while when I joined, I know that some of the Linkley people are on the call, and some of my MYOB peers are on the call. So
he's going to say lots of offensive stuff, so hang around.
No, I won't, but they'll know what I'm talking about. Is that now I've lost my train of thought. But look, as I go through that, so when I started at Linkley, as an example, the board, talking to the board, talking to the CEO, talking to a lot of the key technical people across the space, the key call out there was, you got to fix our cloud stack. You got to fix and uplift the capability and the scalability here. And it's, you know, it's held together with, you know, duct tape, and we've got to kind of uplift some of those practices. All of that was true. And all of that needed some focus. But having come out of a lot of those conversations and then further conversations with the board, you know, I kind of uplifted things and realized, look, that is a problem, but things are working, right? It's a problem, but things are working. But there's this whole bunch of other stuff that's not working, right? The teams aren't talking to each other. The teams are overloaded. We had, within the second month, I think we did a bit of an audit of the number of projects we had across the technology team, and there were some 45 or so projects across the team, across 16 developers, right? So that level of WIP is just unsustainable and not possible. So people were burning out. People were leaving because, you know, hey, nobody's actually managing my workload here. So a lot of the initial focus I did was trying to, you know, manage some of that WIP, reduce some of that WIP, but and also
WIP being work in progress, just in case. Yeah.
And then focusing on, you know, scaling out the teams to actually provide a little bit of breathing room for people. And so, you know, we're now getting into the point where I've hired on a brand new architect who's got really solid cloud experience, who I've also worked with in the past. We've hired some really key terminal payments people, and we've got a very solid online payments team and core skill set there, with a couple of people there from the online side of things that are keeping that churning away. So we're starting to address some of those technical concerns, but, you know, some of the people on the call, or some of the people that might watch this later, might sort of lens to this or align to this well. But like I was saying, it came out of all those conversations with 40 plus number one priorities. You can't deal with them all at the same time.
Yeah.
So there's going to be people through that whole journey where, you know, you haven't solved my problem yet, and there's still a good number of problems that we need to solve. But again, it's a matter of looking at, okay, you know, where is my attention best allocated? We've got some really solid technical people. I need to give them room and make sure that they've got the room, the accountability, the understanding, and you know, decision-making capability to make some decisions there around what needs to be done,
And
without having to worry about escalating it up to me or asking me for permission.
to make decisions on a technology stack that you don't know anything about, like you probably know a bit about it now, but and so just with the 90 days, so you spent the first month just listening, and then it sounds like in the second month you started auditing these projects, going through them, all the stuff that was going on. Is that what your second month was?
Yeah, it was.
Did you start making changes then, or yeah, I'd love to hear what you went through in the second month.
Yeah, so the second month was a bit of what you were talking about there around auditing what was going on, but it was also working through some of the reflections of what I'd heard. Excuse me. So I'd spent a bit of time, putting together a bit of information that I could share with the executive team we had at the time, but also my leadership team and anybody else that was needed there as to, okay, and I did this in a town hall for the whole team, to be completely transparent, is, here's what I heard from everybody. These are the key call outs. This is the general spread of sentiment that I've got. Here's what I'm reading as, the main, top 10, 15, I can't even remember how many or what format I used for this, but what are the key call outs that I heard? And then I kind of, started matching that into different dimensions, in that, here's the things we need to do on a technical side of things. Here's the things we need to do on a scalability or side of things. Here's what we need to do on our ways of working. Here's where I see some of the friction points that we've got. And then just calling out, okay, here's what we're going to work on first, or the top number of 1 and 2 things that we're going to work on. And it was coming out of that, that we kind of worked through and said, yep, okay, doing a bit of an audit here of kind of saying, I'm hearing, one of the dimensions I'm hearing is I've got too much on my plate. We had a real key person risk problem, both in those that had left, but also those that were then left behind, and the amount that got loaded up on them. And working through, okay, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to manage this? And coming out of that then was that, okay, well, we can't deal with 20 people in the technology team, 16 of them being developers. It's just not enough people. So we need a growth element here.
Yeah.
So within that second to third month, that's when we started ramping up the hiring. So I had conversations with the board and with the CEO to kind of say, look, here's what you asked me to do. Here's what I've found. Here's what I want to do with that. And a key part of that is we need to scale the teams up if we're going to survive this. And they got buy-in. And this was one of the things that I felt really valuable, back to that private equity versus not conversation. We've got a really engaged private equity board. They understand, I believe, for the most part, software development. Tim Reed is our chairman and is a partner in the VC fund. He was ex-MYOB CEO. So they're a board and they're a private equity firm that focuses on software development. So they understand software development. So when I was able to sort of turn around and say, here are the problems I'm seeing and here's what I want to do about it, there was a lot more, yep, understand, go and do it kind of messaging than what I'm used to, for example, with trying to do something similar between the public listing and then KKR, where it was more about, to be fair, cost reduction and cost management and making sure that, our profit margins stay high. Private equity firm obviously concerned about profit margin, but they're more concerned about the growth, right? So they're about investing into the company understandably. They're about investing in the right way in order for that to have a sort of, broader growth than might be in the investment. But they understand the need to kind of say, we can't actually grow the company if we don't have enough people there to do what we know needs to be done there, and then invest in new initiatives as they come up. So that was an easier, I know it went a bit of a segue there, but that was an easier conversation than I expected it to be honest.
Yeah.
Given that I was asking to double the team. Right, I was asking to go from 20 people
to double the cost base. Yeah. And was that in the I'm coming back to this because I'm kind of liking getting just really specific for everyone listening around the first 90 days. So did you start making recommendations in month 2? Started making recommendations in month 2, probably started acting on them in month 3. Now, it's not necessarily that black and white, right? There were some things I was hearing around transparency and visibility of what was going on that, I acted on pretty quickly. It's like the easy fix. Yeah, real low stuff, no brainer.
it's not hard to run a town hall and say, hey, everybody, here's what I'm hearing and here's what I'm doing. So within the first month or two, I was running town halls. I personally do something I started to do at MYOB a little bit on and off, but really dived into at Linkley as I do weekly video logs where Friday morning, as I'm out on my morning walk to try to get outside, particularly under lockdown right now, trying to get out and exercise. I'm just running a bit of a video log saying, here's what my week's been like and here's what I've been focusing on. And, any questions, let me know. So a quick 4 or 5 minute thing. But a lot of that sort of stuff all together, when you've got, the video log and you've got open and transparent town halls, and you take the opportunity to actually listen and provide a high trust environment. Not everybody engages with it straight off, they've got to learn, but a high trust environment where anybody can ask me anything and I'll give them a straightforward answer really changes the landscape, particularly from any sort of organization that, not to, you may prick your ears up at this, Scott, but a lot of founder-led businesses tend to be very much driven by the founder, right?
What are you trying to say, Tony?
Exactly. And I know you don't operate like this, but I
know. It's hard for me, even as you've got to be consciously aware of this, because there is an element of, I've been in this, I'm 5 steps ahead of you, I know what's happening, and I see it in myself. And I see it because I have the good fortune of working with lots of founders and CEOs as well. It's funny when I see it in them and I'm like, what are they doing? Why are they doing that? And then I walk back to the office and do the exact same thing with my team. And I'm like, it's a blessing and a curse, I believe. And you've got to be like super aware of it, because on the one hand, you've got to make some of the bets that no one else can see or do. And you kind of just got to say, this is what we're doing. Because that's kind of that founder CEO journey that they've got to go through. On the other hand, there's instances where you do it, you leave everyone behind, and your plan falls flat on its face. So it's a very
finding that balance between what you need to drive and what you need to engage with others.
The team, yeah, 100%.
And I think a lot of founder-led businesses, and I think True was both for both of the core businesses that were part of this acquisition. So one PCF POS, one Premier Technologies, was that a lot of decisions went up to that founder, the CEO, and answers went back down. So there was a lack of empowerment. People were used to escalating something, getting an answer and coming back. So a change of environment between both Malta, who's very open and transparent, and myself, who engages well with that too. People just weren't used to that. So there was a bit of, and I, those listening will probably not mind me saying, because I've shared it openly with them too, is there's a bit of a shock moment, right? Is, hang on a minute, I've got opportunity to make a decision here. What do I do? Right?
Yeah.
How to get through this.
Yeah.
So there's an element there as being more used to it, that you've got to train and educate people in how to deal with that, right? It's not just a matter of, and this was a couple of mistakes I made during the first 6 months, even in kind of, I built the MYOB teams to a point where I can kind of say, okay, here's what we need to achieve, go and work it out, versus being able to do that here at Linkley. Everything froze, right? And I had to actually get in there and help everybody, work through it and come out with something at the other end. It's a growth area that people will need to get used to.
There's a really interesting question from Alexander Richter on this, actually, which is super relevant. He's saying, would love to hear about your experience on KPIs and OKRs. And that, this ties into that. It sounds like, if I'm just reading between the lines, like you kind of tried to set some, at Linkley, you tried to set some goals and say, look, here's what we're going to go achieve, go and achieve it, or maybe even work with the teams to say what goals are you going to achieve. But that didn't work, and you had to work through it, or it worked differently to how you'd done it at MYOB. Would love to hear, how it'd be great to unpack a bit of that more. Did you set OKRs or KPIs or something?
No, really good question. So at the moment at Linkley, we don't have OKRs or KPIs. What I did, or where the dimension, and I'll talk to them more in detail because we did work through this at MYOB. So I'll talk to it there, but also integrated research. At Linkley, where the dimensions I'm talking to there are a little bit more situational. So type of thing that I was talking to is as part of that initial growth area where we're saying, okay, we're currently, within the first week, somebody was looking over my shoulder as I was looking at the org chart, and they said, "Oh, don't bother looking at that because that's not how we work." I'm like, okay, problem number one to fix, right? Let's reorganize ourselves around how we actually operate so that we can actually, provide some level of understanding and accountability and dependency management and so on. And so an ask I put to the broader team was, you guys know what's going on. How should we work? How should we structure ourselves? And that was a real challenging experience. And I don't think they'll mind me saying, because the reaction there was, I don't know, I've never actually thought about that before. I've just kind of, the structure's been there and I've done what I can.
Been given
So all of a sudden having the ask, if you like, or the expectation put on them was unfair of me, right? It was unfair of me to kind of go, hey, you guys sort this out, because they weren't used to it, they weren't experienced in it, they weren't actually enabled to be able to do that. So it's that sort of stuff that was a call out for me around setting a high level goal and helping execute. So we instead went through some workshops with the team and said, okay, here are different options that we might have. What do we want to try? How do we want to put it forward? And let's put it through as a trial. Now, that's just as an example of trying to explain what I was referring to. Now, on the topic of OKRs and KPIs, the journey I went through, starting with integrated research, was at integrated research, our KPIs were bonus related. So devs even had bonus components they could, profit share out of. And KPIs started off being driven by the business, in fact, from the board level, right? Here are the KPIs, everybody are cascaded down, here's what you've got to do. Teams just didn't engage with that. There was no understanding for them as to how what they did actually impacted profit, or what they did actually impacted churn, or what they did impacted, how it impacted, the revenue or the cost base, right? They just didn't understand it. So, it was something that they didn't have to care about and therefore didn't aspire to, and therefore the KPIs didn't actually change or improve. In fact, most of the time they got worse. And so then you get the expectation or the outcome coming back and, hey, I didn't get the bonus I was expecting because this KPI I had no control over told me I couldn't.
Yeah.
And that's a core failing, I think, of KPIs in general.
Alexander's saying, yes. That's my life. I'm hearing like, that's what's going. Sorry, keep going.
It goes on so often, right? But a lot of that comes down to how you define the KPIs, right? Too often they're just completely misrepresenting what you're actually working on or what the team or individual is doing.
Yeah.
So at Integrated Research, I worked with the team there, and in fact, I was working with the architect I've now got at Integrated Research, working on this problem, where we kind of collaborated a bit more and with the GM at the time and said, okay, the business has some core level of concern. So I want to see profit, quality, and whatever else. There were like 3 buckets that they were looking at. How about we say that everybody's KPI is 30% subject to those dimensions, right? The business wants to be able to control something. I think at the time there was an element in there of, if things go pear-shaped, then there's a multiplier in there that the business can say, nobody gets any bonus, everybody gets 10% of applied to whatever. So a bit of a multiplier there. But then there's a big chunk, 60, 70, whatever it was percent, that we went to the teams and said, how do you want to operate and measure yourselves, right? This is going to be driven by you. And that's where we kind of put, again, some guidance on it and said, okay, you need to have dimensions there around outcomes or productivity. We moved from productivity to outcomes, and also quality, right? The two need to be balanced. You can't do a whole pile of shit and excuse the French and get your bonus. It's got to be high quality at the same time as high delivery, right? Or it's got to be quality to whatever expectation of delivery might be set. So each team, I had ultimately around 12 teams there. Each team had different variances of the KPIs that they might have, but they were all along those dimensions. And I got buy-in from the business to be able to do that. And so the teams actually bought into that. The teams measured it. It became part of their agile measurements. And so it was less about, hey, there's this KPI and my bonus is driven on that, and more about, here's how I monitor my day-to-day, my sprint outcomes, and am I doing well or am I not? And then that just naturally transitioned to get a bonus at the end. Now at MYOB, there was no bonus component. But what we did try to instill is that same sense of the teams set and control the measures that they're looking at a team level as to how they want to measure themselves, how they want to work through that. At MYOB, I think, we got relatively, I want to say, advanced in that there's this book called Accelerate that talks about 4 key dimensions, and I'm not going to remember them all off the top of my head, but there was like mean time to resolution, high level cycle time, time to glass, some of those dimensions. We got to the point where those were kind of guiding how we operated, and it was a lens of, that guided how the team themselves operated, and then those measures, across the 140 people I had at my MYOB practice that was partnered with another division led by a guy, another head of delivery who I still keep in heavy contact with, and I know he's on the call, but I won't call him out of New Zealand, who had a similar sort of size team that we were working together. We were managing a program across 28 teams by the end of what we were looking at. So that level of consistency of reporting between the teams meant that we could correlate things up to an overall program view of how things worked. And from that, we could, as a business unit, match that against the business OKRs. Now, it wasn't until probably the last 12 months or so of my time in MYOB that we started looking at OKRs. And I don't think we got them to a point where they were really useful or measurable. I think they were still very much driven by what the business lens was, which was really hard to kind of correlate. You need to find a way to kind of, at a high level, there's business goals or objectives that you want to achieve, but then at a division level, you need to construct your own that are aligned to that, but not necessarily a cascade of.
Especially when you've got it's like our goal is we want to release another version of a product or a new product that is going to create X revenue. It's like, well, okay, the development and product and design team can do something about that, but it's still dependent on marketing reaching the right number of customers and the sales team getting through the right number of pipeline. It's still, there's a lot of moving parts, so it makes it hard to say, well, we can't attack that. We can't say we're going to hit that revenue because we've got these other dependencies, right?
And it comes back to what we've got in our control. So at a division level, we were at the point there with, I mentioned my peer in New Zealand. So we were heads of delivery. There were 2 heads of product that were paired up with us. We had a full senior leadership team that included head of marketing, head of operations, head of sales, and so on. So we had, vertical is what we called it at the time, coverage of the whole domain. So at that level, we could talk about, what are the key cross-functional objectives we want to achieve. But then you need to the technology team, to the delivery team and product combined, kind of go, okay, what are the objectives that actually make sense to what you've got control over that drive off that? So while at a high level, we may have revenue targets or churn targets or, new seat targets, what is it that you can do as a delivery or product team to enable that and support that? And from that, we construct what those objectives are.
And so Chris has got a question, which is, did you have goals / OKRs, maybe at MYOB as an example, that spoke to how you delivered as much as what? And I think you were touching on it there with your time to glass, your cycle time. That was your how, wasn't it? Like, how quickly are we able to get a release out? How many bugs does that release have?
That's right. So the objectives themselves at a very high level were often about the outcomes. So what you're ultimately trying to achieve. But as you break that down, yes, there needs to be that.
An outcome might be, just to make it super specific, an outcome might be release version 2 of one of our accounting products.
Exactly. Exactly. And then as you break that down, you've got a similar sort of challenge that I think Chris is alluding to there, where, I talked about before, that balance between productivity or outcomes and quality. Your KPIs, your measures, your metrics, how you measure yourself need some level of balance. Otherwise, things get misweighted and go wrong. I mean, it's like a salesperson having a KPI of just reaching X number of dollars and focusing on, therefore, the high volume, high paying product set,
maybe the wrong customer as well. Yeah,
exactly right. So you want something that's kind of actually going to reach what you're trying to drive. And so yes, as much as what you deliver as how you deliver it needs to be encapsulated in some of those measures.
Yeah.
So there were things that we were looking at as we built out, particularly across the larger number of teams as we scaled over the final 18 months that I was there, was around process adoption and cadence as to, do your sprints actually complete, right? Do you deliver what you say you were going to do at the quality that you said you were going to? So sprint completion was a metric that many teams actually had as to, this sprint was 80% complete, let's say, as a base. We want to make sure that that grows over time, or that when it dips, we understand why it dips and we can make a change to kind of correct that.
Yeah.
So to Chris's question, yes, it needs to be a balance of both the how you do stuff and the what. And that's a big focus of what I've been. Sorry, Scott.
It sounds like you're about to go. I was going to say, and then how have you applied this to getting it working at Linkly, or building the foundations out? It sounds like.
And that's the core of what I have been doing at Linkly in that dimension. So I've had conversations with my leadership team, not so much with the technical team at a developer or QA level, but certainly with my leadership team around, okay, what are the quarterly goals that we might want to achieve? What are the monthly goals that come out of that? How do you as an individual contribute to that? We've started to have those conversations, but one of the things that we were challenged by in that, and I took a step back from it quite deliberately, and I told the team I was taking a step back quite deliberately.
Yeah.
Is as I came on board with Malta and some of our other new leadership team, we didn't really have a business strategy that would help guide what those OKRs, KPIs, objectives.
Yeah. So you'd be setting it in a vacuum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the first 6 months or so, we were really, there was a business strategy in the sense of we kind of had some roadmaps. We knew what we were doing, but a lot of it was protective and reactionary.
Yep.
That is perhaps a good way to put it. So for that 6 months, we're really playing catch up. We're getting to the point where, okay, now we've got some capacity in order to do what we know we need to do now, which then starts giving ourselves some mind share and bandwidth to start thinking about the strategic element. Okay, what next? How does this actually look for us going forward? What does our next 3 to 5 years actually look like?
Yeah.
So it's only recently over the last quarter, I would say, so Q3 calendar year, that we've worked through that, and we've been transparent with the teams in working through that as to, here's our evolution and depth of that business strategy. We realized, the strategic thought that we had needed articulation, but it was essentially along the right path. We just needed to execute.
Yeah.
And now we're in that execute mode. And now as we get into that execute, we need to start structuring out of that. Okay, here's the business strategy. Therefore, between the pillars we've got in that business strategy, here are the goals or objectives we want to achieve. And how do we, derive the detail from that? So that's kind of a next step piece. But all the way through, as you alluded to before, it's been about setting that foundation, right? In order to do some of this stuff, we've got to get and start driving some consistency in our Agile practices, in our ways of working. And we've still got many gaps there. My team will, if I turned around here and said, hey, we've made major improvements there and we're just about done, they'd laugh me out of the room. But I think we've made some good projects and we're probably, 50-ish sort of % of the way there.
Yeah.
What we've been able to achieve, but there's more to go.
Yeah. And I just quickly, there's a question from Lily that says, it sounds like when you're setting these objectives, you've been setting it at a team level, not the individual level.
A little bit of both. So one of the dimensions that I've been working through, or had started working through with the team before we kind of put pause on it. So my direct reports was, here are the high level things that we know the business is trying to achieve. Therefore, here's what we're trying to achieve as a division. But then how do you contribute to that? And also, what are your personal goals, right?
Yeah.
So there's questions there. I don't want to sort of go into too much depth here because people's names might come out of the wash. But, one of the things I have learned in the past is that a lot of the time people move into leadership roles because they see that as their only next step in the career. Not because they're necessarily aspiring to leadership or want leadership. They may be more suitable to principal, engineer, architect, technical track rather than And sometimes they want both, right? So there's a certain lens that I've been having with, or conversations I've been having with people as to what do you actually want, right? And then that starts driving personal goals as far as what we want to do there.
Yeah.
We want to double down and dive into some, coaching conversation around how to improve your leadership skills, or do we want to find ways to, uplift your technical skills and find opportunities for you that way?
And
it's a good question, Lily, but I think we do need to make sure that, and it's also to Chris's questions, as you start setting OKRs and KPIs, that personal element, that personal growth needs to be a big part of what you're doing there. And people need that sense of, okay, the business actually cares about my personal growth as well as its own growth and how I can contribute to both.
And just to unpack, so there was a moment where you were asking the team to set objectives, goals, whatever we'll call them, objectives for now. You were getting them to set. What was the moment where you kind of, it dawned on you where you're like, hold on a second, I haven't given them enough information, because it's really your responsibility and your CEOs of not, like, in a way, right, not providing talk me through that moment where you're like, uh-oh.
So that moment was more applicable, I think, to some of the things I was asking around organizational structure and how to set that up.
Yep.
From a goal side of things, the realization was, as we started to work through some of the detail, I realized, there were some really good things that people were coming up with, and we were able to set division level goals or guiding frameworks for us to work towards. So there was some benefit to that, but I kind of realized that, most of the time people were looking at, okay, well, I'm not sure exactly what goals to set. That made us realize, okay, well, we haven't provided enough structure here yet.
Yeah.
On the organizational structure piece, it was a real learning point for me, and it was actually, hey, I kind of set up the expectation or the guidance that, by date X, Friday a week away, I want to have a conversation. So start thinking about, how you might want to restructure yourselves, and let's get together. And then as we got together and I realized how much people were struggling with it, I realized what I'd done, right? I'd realized the mistake, and I called it out. And I said, look, sorry, it's obvious here this isn't going to work because I didn't set this up right.
Yeah.
And so I took a step back and put some focus in setting it up right.
And how does that work with your board and your shareholders to kind of turn around and say, hey, all right, and your CEO and your peers to kind of say, well, hold on a second, because one thing to say it to your team as well, but it's another to kind of report upwards, so to speak, and sideways and say, hey, look, we went to set some strategic objectives, but we're not going to because we're not ready.
Yep.
So we have no goals, or we're going to wait? Like, talk me through that, because that's probably in some ways the more awkward part of the conversation.
Look, it is, but I'm not sure what insights I can draw for you out of it, because it's actually relatively engaging and collaborative. So on the org structure side of things, there was a fast enough, turnaround there that, the board didn't really notice, right? It was a conversation I had with Malta, the CEO, and other parts of the leadership team to kind of go, hey, this is a mistake, and I'm stepping back, and here's what I'm doing. But we were still able to turn that around within a couple of weeks. So it was still enough that one board update to the next board update, we still had the answers that we were looking at. So and our board isn't, they're not looking for the detail to kind of go, where did you stuff up and let's take us through there. They're looking at, okay, are you actually doing what you said you were going to do? And we got there with that element. On the KPI side, I'm speaking for somebody else because I wasn't part of these conversations, but between the CEO and the CFO, they were having those conversations with the board. And again, it was fairly amicable. There was a realization with that conversation that we really needed to focus on defining the strategy. And it's obvious at that point for everybody involved, you can't set goals and KPIs until you've got the strategy.
The clarity,
So we kind of had some near term, we need to achieve X, Y, Z, or we need to keep
put out a fire over here, make this customer happy for a moment.
But it was very amicable in the sense of going, yep, that just makes sense. So let's take a step back, give you time to define what that strategy looks like, and then define what those objectives and KPIs might be.
Now, we're kind of running out of time a bit. So what I want to do is open up just to any kind of questions. We've got a first one that changes tack a bit from David Shorter. David, thanks for the question. And the question is, Tony, what's your advice to new leaders to be great that are coming from a tech background like yourself? Like, how do you make that transition from, I may be putting words in David's mouth, but it's one I thought about a lot when I was an engineer. Like, how do you make transition from I'm coding to I'm now leading people?
That's a hard one. And it's also, to reuse the term, a little bit existential too for most. And I know, Scott, you and I have spoken about this over various coffees at times too. If I look back through my journey, I'm trying to be quick because I know we are low on time and I want to make sure we get questions, but there is a real shift that any person needs to take when stepping into a leadership role, where they move from finding satisfaction in what they do to finding satisfaction in what they enable, right? What they allow others to do. And a big part of my leadership journey, I never aspired to being a leader. It was always a step up, and it's only recently that I've kind of done that aspirational thing to say, hey, my next gig is the CTO as a step up. It's not to do an engineering manager role or a head of role. I need to and want to be a CTO. It's only recent. What's guided me all the way through, and I know that if everybody looks at leadership things on LinkedIn, it's a common sort of frame of reference, is be the leader you want to be. The reason I stepped into leadership first was because the leader I had wasn't doing what needed to be done. So I started saying, okay, well, here's what I need to do for myself, for my peers. And, because of that, I then got recognized and started stepping up. But the key thing for most is that realization of needing, I think, to step away, or that step away part from being technical to being a leader, is finding a way to bridge that gap between, it's not about what you do yourself, it's about what your team can do. And that's hard. And I still struggle with that today, right? I've been in leadership roles since 2000, 2001 or something. And so a good 20 years, and I still struggle with it today as far as, am I getting deep enough? Am I actually, doing enough for the team? And, it's almost an element there is that, mindset around, am I doing well enough, or am I sort of doing the role that's fit for me? The key part there is, looking at the success of your team, looking at how well your team are operating and whether they're happy or not. So a little bit roundabout, but hopefully the answer's in there somewhere, is that a big part of that is switching from that doing to enabling and finding satisfaction in doing that.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. That's one of the ones I found challenging is not jumping in and because I can code, I still probably not as good as I used to be, or even if it's like solution architecture or something.
And a big part of that,
you got to not
in the room, realizing that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I know that's a quick.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of your fault too, because you're the one that set up the room.
Big part of what I often take in those sessions, that's also a tool that I think many people are aware of, but as a leader, is be the last person to speak. So at Integrated Research, this was a key learning for me, is I found that because I'd been there so long and I knew what was going on, if I spoke first, everybody kind of went, okay, well, Tony said this, so that's what.
Yeah, he's got the right answer and we'll just do that.
So you tend to kind of just listen, absorb, and be the last person. Quite often somebody else will come up with the idea that you've got or the answer that you've got. And because they've come up with it, it'll actually succeed. Whereas if you try to do something top down, it's less likely to. So taking that mindset of shutting your mouth, listening, and being the last one to say something can be a tool to help with that.
I think one of the interesting transitions that I see people go through when they're transitioning out of the technical side to the non-technical is the letting go of the technical competency, because there kind of comes a point with really good engineers where, like, all right, cool, you could go learn that next framework, the latest like thing that's out, and I'm probably a bit far away from it now, but it's like you could go learn Rust, or you could go learn more about like GraphQL and how that's going to work with whatever you're doing. But to be honest, you're probably going to pick it up in 2 minutes anyway. You'll go and read half a web page and bang, you've done it. And it's like, spending time, realizing there's value in spending time on the soft skills.
Yep.
And learning about the soft skills starts to become, that's like a really interesting jump that I often see people kind of shifting around, because you're used to like, all right, I'm going to learn the new framework, I'm going to learn the new library, I'm going to learn that new, because there's always something new being released. And actually it's stop paying attention to that and start paying attention to all the non-technical things going on. Like, are you taking people on a journey with you when you try and put a solution forward instead of the I was a very abrasive young engineer instead of the like, I am right and you're all wrong like approach, like maybe listen to them outside of the meeting. There's a lot of stuff around that I often see as the big, go spend your learning time there. Even if you are going to take the technical track, still those are the skills that are going to help you, not so much like I know the latest, I can quote the latest framework release and the 5 function, whatever it might be that's been released.
Instead, it's how you have an effective conversation, how you have an effective discord, how you disagree with each other, perhaps. And look, on that dimension, I've got browser windows with 30 plus or more tabs of various training courses, technical and otherwise, that I still want to do, right? I need to dive into Azure fundamentals. I need to dive into AWS. I need to get more up to speed on some of the latest tech. But given the background, at least I've got the engineering nous to kind of understand conceptually, even if I don't understand in detail how React.js works, for example. I understand, the satellite things as to how it fits in the whole and what to do with it.
Yeah.
But a big part of my journey too, and I know we don't have a lot of time to go into this in much depth, but my reason for going and doing an MBA was kind of a realization that, there are many technical people who really build technical depth. There are not many technical people who take a leadership route and can provide solid managerial leadership capability to a technical team. And when I realized and had coaching advice that that was something I was capable of, I dived into it and said, okay, well, it was a big area that I saw as failing in my leaders and managers very early on. So, part of that, be the leader you want to be, is kind of going, okay, well, I can help other juniors, mid-level, senior engineers through that.
Yeah, through that journey.
What you pay attention to. And does it mean that I'm no longer technical or don't want to be technical? Absolutely not. But it means that I'm kind of looking at it and going, okay, well, I've got an architect and I've got, senior developers who really know their space. If I actually start diving into some of that and doing their job for them, I'm doing them a disservice as much as anything.
And there's a really interesting question on that point, actually, from Alex. Alex has said, I struggle with getting into the flow, 8 hours coding versus 8 hours, let's just call it managing stuff. How do you balance that if you're making that transition out of Tony's going to say, I haven't got that because we've spoken about this. We're like, it just never comes. But maybe you could provide a more sensible.
Look, I don't have a clear answer to that. Look, the reality is, most of the time where I find that flow in what I'm doing is on the weekends. It's in the evenings. We instituted similar to a meeting-free day, we instituted a meeting-free afternoon at Linkley every Wednesday afternoon. So there's opportunity there to provide a bit of flow and just say, look, I've got no meetings. The whole business doesn't have any meetings, so we all get to have a bit of a flow. But the reality is that, my days and any leader's days probably are full of back-to-backs, switching context from one issue to another, from one domain to another. So you need to learn that context switching. But there's also something that I can't remember who it was, but I think it's actually something I got at the MBA through one of the philosopher courses, where there was somebody there, or a message that stuck in my head, where as a leader, your impact is in the conversations you have. It's less about what you do, and it's more in those conversations. You're helping people work through a problem, you're helping people make a decision, or you're making a decision, or you're understanding the context of how things fit together by listening to them be able to make an engaged choice. And so that switch too it's less about what I feel like I'm doing and what I'm achieving personally, and more about what you're enabling that helps with that.
And what you're getting at there is like, I helped Alex make a better choice about how to spend his time versus I finished the thing that I needed to do.
Or I finished,
and giving yourself a bit of a a nice friendly stamp. Like I'm thinking about kids' school, like a nice stamp of, hey, you achieved something today. And
that's right.
I might just add.
You go through a period where at the end of the week I started looking at what I'd achieved and kind of going, I haven't achieved anything, to realizing that no, through all those sessions, people have, worked through they had, or you've helped them, through a tooling change, or something that you said prompted an extra thought in how to solve and troubleshoot an issue. Right?
Yeah.
All of those things help. They feel a little bit light, right, when I say it like that. And a lot of people might look at that and going, oh, well, what do you actually do as a leader? But it is often those conversations that really do help the team out. You then have your day job post that, right? So, I'm not going to shy away from it. There are after hours work as a leader, and, you do want to find a way to balance your family and work life, and it is hard. The only way to really carve that out or work that out is to carve out time like meeting-free afternoons or big blocks where you can kind of just sit and get in the flow of what you need to do and have allocation to help others out.
Yeah, it's something I can just touch on. Something that Alex, is what you're saying, is like I've found often it's about with engineers that are making that transition, sharing with them that, hey, you've got to take control of your time now. And if you need a morning, if you're a team lead or you're in that role and you need a day or 2 days or whatever it is to get your thing done, it's up to you now to do that. It's not on your team lead. You're the one that's got to say, I'm out on Wednesday. I'm out because I've got a feature that I've got to punch out. And there is that delicate transition period that everyone seems to go through, of like where you're coding and you're also managing. And it's really up, you've got to be the one to take control of that, has been my observation. But also I think the sooner you can also get your team to help you with that, the better as well, because it's in that midpoint that's the most dangerous too, I think, where you're not really coding and you're not really managing either. It's a bit of a danger zone, I've seen too.
Carving out that time can be hard too, because quite often when you're carving out that time, the right type of leader, for want of a better phrase, would look at that and kind of go, well, I'm actually not there and being responsive to my team, and that's bad. So you still watch your Slack messages or your email.
Yeah.
Whereas there's a level of, as much as you as a leader want to respect your team's time, you need to realize that they kind of need to respect yours too.
Yeah.
And while you may be carving 2 or 3 hours out to get your stuff done, after that 2 to 3 hours, you're fully available to them then. And there's a quid pro quo that needs to go back and forth there. And we need to be nice to ourselves.
Mr. Watson, the CEO of IBM, used to have no meetings before 1 p.m. Right. You could not book in with him every day of the week. That's running a company this size. That was IBM's heyday, but that's something I always think about. It was very controlled like that. We've run out of time. Tony, thank you so much for having us.
No, thank you. Thank you for the questions that came through. Those were really solid, engaging.
Yeah, excellent questions. I'm just going to do a quick. We've got can I share my screen in time? We've got a session coming up next week with Doug from Airtasker. Doug's going to be talking about scaling empowered engineering teams. We've had a great chat today about really like goal setting. I think what it came down to the first 90 days. And next week, we're going to be talking to Doug about how do you get that empowerment happening? Probably like the foundations that Tony and I have been talking about. Really looking forward to having you all back. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. It was so much fun. Hopefully speak to you all next week or sometime in the future. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Scott.